Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 211 of the Book Cougars, two middle-aged women on the hunt for a good read. I'm Emily.
And I'm Chris. And it's July.
Yeah, this episode is dropping on July 2nd.
Yes.
So we thought it'd be great to have a mid-year check-in on the reading intentions we talked about way back yonder at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, it's always good to do that, right? A little check-in, see how you're doing, see what you need to pick up or check off.
Yeah, or decide you're not going to do.
Exactly.
Because sometimes that happens with intentions too. We have the best of, but it doesn't necessarily happen. You know, the best of intentions.
Right.
Yeah.
So our first thing was to read 52 books. For both of us, that's our annual numerical goal, which we usually slaughter, for lack of a better word. We blow past it. Maybe that's a better way of saying that. And according to my Goodreads, which I've been hit or miss on, I'm trying to be better about it. I'm right on track. Yeah.
So what does that mean?
I've read 25 so far this year is what it's saying.
Nice. I've read 39.
Nice.
Which shocked me. That seemed
really?
like a lot.
I feel like you've been really chewing through some books.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. So both of us use that reading challenge that they have on Goodreads is what we're talking about, which is just a nice way to track what you're doing and how you're doing it.
Right. There's 52 weeks in a year, and reading one book a week seems like a manageable goal, and just to keep yourself in the flow.
Yeah. I have to say, when I was looking to see how many I'd read, I saw that I have 74 on my currently reading. I was like, I think I have a little cleaning up to do there.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So you've probably read way more than 39 books already this year, don't you think?
No, I think a lot of those end up being cookbooks, which I put in there so I can remember them and see that I've checked them out of the library or cooked from them, but I don't read the whole thing. So I don't usually move them over to read, you know?
Yeah.
If I had to hazard a guess, I would say that's the lion's share of them. But I don't know. The others could be DNFs that I never moved off.
Mm-hmm.
So I gave myself a little homework assignment to clean that out a little.
Okay. How's your Maggie O Farrell reading going? That was on your list.
Yeah. One of my reading intentions was to continue on my reading of all of Maggie O Farrell's books. She's written 12 books, one of which is a memoir and one is a children's book. And I have 4 more to go. I did already this year read The Marriage Portrait, and I've started instructions for A Heat Wave. So I'm making progress. I don't know if I'm going to try to read them all this year. I think I'm going to not be hot to get them done this year.
Yeah, that seems nice to me.
So how is your Willa Cather short story project going?
That's going really well. It's July, so that means there are only 2 stories left.
Wow.
Believe it or not. June would have been the conclusion, which started in 2019. But then I discovered 2 stories that hadn't made it on there. I don't know why. So we're ending with those 2 stories.
So August is your official end date.
Yes.
Well, I decided that one of my intentions this year was going to be to read a short story every Monday. At first, I said I was going to read one every day, and then I got a hold of myself. But I have been reading one every Monday, and part of why I wanted to do this was to dig into some of the story collections that I have all over the place. I've done a good job of that. I've also purchased more, which was not the intention. So I've read 26 short stories out of 25 collections, which is pretty cool. Old Crimes by Jill McCorkle was my double up that I've read twice. And I had one debacle where I accidentally read a chapter from a novel by Annie Proulx.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah,
yes.
That old Ace in the Hole. I thought this short story doesn't make any sense. And then I discovered it was the middle of a novel. And then I also skipped one week because I fell asleep when I was trying to read a Kurt Vonnegut.
Yeah.
So no offense to Kurt Vonnegut.
And how are you tracking that? Are you writing them in your notebook? Do you have a spreadsheet?
I have a spreadsheet.
Okay.
And I have it where I write down the name of the collection, because sometimes it's not all the same author. It can be one of those Best American Short Story collections or something. And then I write the name of the short story, the author, and just a really quick little note about what it was about to help spur my memory. Yeah.
Nice. Very good. Well, one of my other intentions was to read the books that I want to read, be free range reader, not reading too many buddy reads or scheduled reading. And that's been going well so far. I've only done one buddy read this year so far, which is Moby Dick, which is a big one. I have another one coming up that I'm looking forward to. There's a third one that got delayed until the fall, so I'm feeling really good about my reading choices. And I've been starting a lot of books and not following through on them. I'm not necessarily DNFing them. They're still sitting next to my reading chair, but I don't feel any pressure about finishing them.
That's great. Or maybe picking them up again when they're talking to you, speaking to you.
And they're still sitting there for that reason, you know, because I still like to see them. Yeah.
Nice. Well, I was wanting every month to watch a book to film adaptation, and I was supposed to be doing it with The Gentleman Caller. I have been watching a book to film adaptation, not always with him. So far, Boys in the Boat, based on the book by Daniel James Brown, American Fiction, based on the book Erasure by Percival Everett, Adaptation, which was kind of a meta. It wasn't directly based on a book, but it has that story arc about Susan Orlean's The Orchid Thief in it. Mm-hmm. And then Shirley, based on Susan Scarf Merrill's novel of the same name. And then I've been doing this Presumed Innocent-a-thon where I watched the movie starring Harrison Ford, and now I'm watching the television series, which they're releasing once a week for 8 weeks. And that's based on the novel of the same name by Scott Turow.
Nice.
Yeah.
Some of my other intentions is to read some 19th century novels. I have 3 of them on my list that I'm really looking forward to getting to this summer. I am off for July and most of August. I'm not working at the library, so I'm really excited to have some unstructured time. And those novels are The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, Silas Mariner, and A Tale of Two Cities. And I think A Tale of Two Cities and The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, I think those might qualify as big books. I'm not sure about that. Yeah,
I wouldn't be surprised, especially A Tale of Two Cities. That one seems like a chunkster. It might depend on the edition you get. Do you have any others?
Well, the other thing is reading Margaret Fuller, who was my author of the year, and I haven't read her yet, and that's fine. I was kind of thinking about it in terms of summer because I knew I had Moby Dick in the spring/late winter, I think that was. It's all a blur already, Emily. Oh my gosh. But I am starting Margaret Fuller, her Women in the 19th Century, this week. And that's tied into a Biblio Adventure I'll be doing in the coming weeks. So more about that later in this episode.
Right on.
Yeah. We had some Biblio Adventures on our list as well, a wish list. And we'll mention a few of those later when we get to that segment.
Do you have any reading intentions that you want to tell us about? We would love to hear if you set them at the beginning of the year, how you're doing. Feel free to email us at bookcougars@gmail.com.
Yeah, and absolutely no shame ever if you decide, nah, I'm not doing that anymore.
Yeah, we'd love to hear about that too, because sometimes there's a reason you decide. You know, like I think sometimes it's in the writing of the intention is kind of fun and interesting. Because I was even thinking that as I was reading the books that I have left for Maggie O Farrell. I'm like, they're her first 3 novels. Do I want to read those? Mm-hmm. I don't know. My thoughts on that might change.
Right. And I love making lists of books. I just love doing that so much. And so sometimes I realize that's part of the pressure in the past I've put on myself to read certain things. Now I'm just like, it's on a list.
Right.
And I like that list. The list is the point.
Yeah. I like to look at it.
Yeah.
It's fun.
Right?
Yeah. All right.
So, what are you currently reading?
I am currently reading Instructions for a Heat Wave by Maggie O Farrell. This was published in 2013. It is her 6th novel, and it starts out in July 1976, and London is stifling due to an extended heat wave. Not just one of those couple-day heat waves. I think they're on week 3 or something. And the patriarch of the family heads out to get his daily newspaper and doesn't return. He's older. He's married to Greta, who begins to call her 3 adult children, Michael, Francis, Monica, and Aoife, to tell them Dad's gone missing. And that's about as far as I've gotten. What she is doing with the novel is as each of those 3 children's characters are introduced, you start to learn of their backstories. of themselves as adults now, but also their growing up years. And as I've found reading Maggie O Farrell, some of it you feel like you're reading through a little gauze. You're not quite sure what's going on, but her writing is so good, you want to stick with it. Several of them, I've gone back and read the beginning once I finished, and I feel like, oh, you're probably going to do that on this one too. I'm really enjoying being in her world again. Again, it's called Instructions for a Heat Wave.
That's awesome. I was in England, in London, during the summer of 1976.
You're kidding.
No, with my family, my sister, my mom, and my dad. We were there. It was so friggin' miserable. In our house growing up, we had one window AC unit that my dad would put in the summer. So when it was super hot, we'd all sleep on the living room floor.
Yeah.
But in England, you know, they didn't have AC. I mean, they have more nowadays. It was just brutal. I just remember we stayed in a place where we shared a bathroom with everyone who was staying on the same floor. And it was so hot. It was like the third or fourth floor up, and it was just hot. And you're sharing a bathroom, and you're 10 years old, and you're like, this is gross.
And you just want to stand in the cold shower.
Oh, yeah. There was not even a cold shower. Like, it was all warm. And, you know, they don't do ice. So it was pretty brutal.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say it's hard to be reading this in the summer, but fortunately, right now, anyway, for us, it's not been too hot.
Yeah.
Or I don't know if I could be reading it.
We had a little reprieve from some super hot weather. But, you know what, there have been several novels written by English writers about that summer or set during that summer because it was so record-breaking. And, you know, things go haywire when there's a heat wave.
Yeah, yeah. Whew, I'm like, I need to get my journal and fan myself just talking about this. Whew. What about you?
Well, talk about having to fan yourself for a variety of reasons. Not all good at this point. I'm 38% into The Woman's Room by Marilyn French, and I had to take a break. Oh my God, this book is just brutal. It's about women in the late 1950s at this point in these very heteronormative marriages where the gender roles are so divided. The man, you know, he goes out to work. The woman stays home and raises children. They usually don't have great access to birth control. There's no pill, and condoms are not foolproof. And there's a lot of misery for the women and the children and the men. So I had to take a break from it. Yeah. And I'm not 100% I'll go back to it because, again, I want to read it because it is such a classic. And I've heard from women of a certain age who read it, and it's a book that turned them into being a feminist and realizing the plight of women and that they weren't alone necessarily in what they were experiencing. It's tough. And I'm hoping there might be some light coming into it soon, some freedoms for some of the women, because there is one woman in particular who is starting to really question a lot of things. There's a lot of essentialism. You know, that's just the way it is. That's the way men are. This is the way women are. This is your whole purpose for being a woman. Yeah.
The times have changed. Maybe you don't need to read that anymore. I don't know. We'll see.
Well,
you
know, my historian brain really likes to read things set in a time period. And I think this is one that it was such an important novel. And it's, I think, very relevant to what's going on today, that there is certainly a percentage of Americans who want to go back to some mythological 1950s where people were happy and women stayed home and had children and men earned money and everyone had a wonderful life. And this book is giving lie to that propaganda. And I think it might be just as important now as it was back then. So again, that's The Woman's Room by Marilyn French.
I'm reading Hot, Hot Chicken, a Nashville story by Rachel Louise Martin. My book buddy, Chris, gave me this. I think you got it when you were in Chicago.
I did,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm reading it and I'm listening to the audiobook, which is narrated by Julian Irons. I'm enjoying the audiobook. I do find that she has kind of like a voice where she sounds like she's out of breath. Do you know that? Yeah. So I feel like I can't breathe when I'm listening to it. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to continue. I might listen while I'm on a walk or a drive, but I think I'll go definitely back to the paper copy.
Is she kind of like breathy, like some BBC announcers are? They kind of have that breathiness.
No, it's not. It's like as if when she reads the sentence, she's running out of breath. And I'm kind of like, take a breath. It's stressing me out.
That hot chicken is like taking her breath away.
Too much snacking and reading over there. Oh my gracious. I love it so far. It's interesting, but it's much more historical than I thought it was going to be. I think because of the title, I was thinking it was going to really be about what hot chicken is and recipes maybe, but it's really about the Prince family who created and invented this, and that it was for the most part for 70 years something that was eaten in Black neighborhood in Nashville. And what is hot chicken? Hot chicken is fried chicken that's spicy. That's the easiest way to describe it. It's a little bit more complicated than that. You know, the recipe involves buttermilk and frying and lots of spice and different sauces you can put on it. I'm looking forward to getting to the part where it is about them starting to cook the chicken. That hasn't happened yet. But it's also a lot about history and enslaved people and what cooking meant for them and land ownership and how Nashville was segregated and the idea of generational wealth. And if you don't have access to land, how it impacts your future. So she's doing a lot with this book that I wasn't expecting.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting to know that. Because I saw that in hot chicken and I thought of you because we had just gone to that hot chicken place in New Haven.
Yeah.
That there's a local, it's a chain now. I think they have like 3 or 4 locations in the New Haven area.
Yes, and I've definitely been craving going there as I've been reading this. But what's interesting is I was looking at their staff and the founders of it, and everybody is white. And that, I think, is one of the points that she's making here, is that this is a food that was created by a Black family and has been really co-opted. And a lot of people are making money off of it and not giving credence to the history of it.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that about the New Haven chicken places. Okay.
Yeah. So again, this is called Hot, Hot Chicken, a Nashville Story by Rachel Louise Martin.
Well, I'm still reading Tides, The Science and Spirit of the Ocean by Jonathan White. This is the book that I chose to read in the I'll Have What You're Reading tribute that we're doing to Jenny Colvin, podcaster extraordinaire of Reading Envy, a friend of ours who passed away. And it's a 2-year anniversary of her passing. So I chose this book because she gave it such a glowing review and talked about it when we were, I think, on her podcast. So he takes this kind of chronologically. I'll probably talk about it more when I finish. Right now, I just got through the time period of Sir Isaac Newton. And what's funny is White puts in a lot of interesting little tidbits that you wouldn't expect about history and culture and things like that. And he's talking about Newton having an intellectual war with another scientist named Hooke. And when Newton, I think he finally took over the presidency of the Royal Society, the first thing he did was to destroy Hooke's portrait. Yes. And so the line that White writes after that is, intellectual giants, again and again, these men proved to be moral and emotional dwarfs.
Wow.
Yeah, because, you know,
ego, right?
Yeah, he talks about some other folks, but so far he's talked about different theories over the expanse of human history of what the tides are and what controls them and moves them. So it's fascinating for that. I'm listening to the audio book that's narrated by Dan Warren, Woren, and it's kind of wearing on me because he doesn't have a lot of emotional range in his narration. It's fine to listen to, but I think I need something more. I find myself drifting sometimes when I'm listening in the car. So I've been going to the book a lot more. Plus, he has great illustrations and stuff to point out things. I also want to mention, I went back and I looked at Jenny's review on Goodreads, and I had forgotten that she also created a playlist on YouTube showing some of the areas that White is talking about in his book, like the huge tide that's in this river in China. So it's really a neat playlist. We'll put a link in the show notes to that.
Now, you said on YouTube.
On YouTube, yeah.
How do you play? So it's just an audio on YouTube.
Oh, no, it's a series of videos showing these different things. showing the tide in the Bay of Fundy,
Okay.
and then the wave in China. So I don't remember how many videos there are. I'm trying not to go too far ahead because she has them in chronological order according to the book as well. But, it just made me miss her even more because she did so much for the reading community.
Yeah.
All over the place.
Yeah.
So
We'll definitely link to that in the show notes.
yeah. So again, that's Tides by Jonathan White. What have you just read, Emily?
Well, talking about water, I finished the novel Pierce Oysters by Joselyn Takacs. This is out now. It's funny. I read 3 debuts, y'all. This is one of them. I was looking at the blurb by Meg Wolitzer on the front of this, and it says, gripping and emotionally rich, ... an impressive, unflinching debut. And I think it's interesting sometimes when they make note that it's a debut, it's like, you've been warned. Just a reminder. It's her first novel. And what I would say about this book is that it has first novelitis, is what I call it, where they have a lot of things they want to say and say it all. And maybe it could have used just a little bit of editing because I think she took on a lot of different things. But I really enjoyed it, and I'm really glad I read it. So this is a fictionalized account of the Deepwater Horizon explosion that took place off the coast of Louisiana in 2010. And the Pierce family are oyster farmers. They've been oyster farmers forever. The patriarch has passed away, and Jordan Pierce, his son, is following in his footsteps and has been happily farming the oyster flats that the family maintains. His brother Benny is a musician and has gone off to New Orleans and is living his best life there. It kind of reminds me of when I moved here and there were hurricanes and there were hurricane warnings, and they'd be like, 10 days from now we might have a hurricane. And that was so strange to me because I grew up with tornadoes that were fast and furious, and I just didn't really know how to handle that information that something devastating might be coming, and you just have to sit and wait or maybe leave. You just don't know. That's kind of the tension in this novel because there's been this terrible oil spill. It was more than a spill. I mean, there's this thing that's just shooting up water. It's like a geyser of oil. It wasn't just one little spill. And so they know that slowly this oil is going to encroach on their oysters, but for now they're harvesting as much as they can. And then the company, Exxon, starts spraying this chemical that's supposed to absorb the oil that they're learning is also a toxic chemical that's going to cause a lot of harm to the environment. Joselyn did research. She got a grant to do an oral history project. So she really understands what it means to be an oyster farmer and put a lot of that in here. But then she also has a lot of family dynamic about addiction and grief because the father's passed away. So that's what I meant about she takes on a lot with the novel. I thought the writing was really good and I really enjoyed it. Again, it's called Pierce Oysters by Joselyn Takacs.
Does she talk about seeding oysters?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. And one of the things you learn is that it takes years. So that's what they know by seeing this devastation come. Like they talk about how when Hurricane Katrina came, they got to have a harvest, but then they knew there was going to be devastation for years to come because of that. You seed the oysters and then it takes them years to grow to the harvestability, right?
Right.
And so the same with this. They know that they're going to lose years of their oyster farm because of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really interesting. And then, the politics around. It's oil land down there. The economy is based on it. So it's a complex situation. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I needed a big break from the woman's room. And so I started browsing my shelves to see what I had that could put me in a different kind of mood. And I saw The Gunkle by Stephen Rowley on my shelves. And I thought, yes, that sounds like the perfect thing. I didn't know much about it other than it was about a gay man who is watching his niece and nephew for the summer. And I've heard a wide variety of types of readers all praise it as really heartwarming and funny. So I was like, okay, The Gunkle and me. I adore this book. It was such the perfect read at the very right time. It's about a man named Patrick who's gay, who is a famous sitcom star living in Palm Springs, which is about 2 hours outside of LA. And he's been there for 4 years not working because his sitcom ended. And he's also suffering from the loss of his partner who died in a car accident. You get news that his best friend from college, who is also his brother's wife, has passed away. And the brother needs to go into rehab. This is a little spoilery. This happens pretty early on. And that's why the niece and the nephew come to stay with him in Palm Springs. And so Patrick is there. He has a housekeeper who comes 3 days a week to also cook for him. But he's really been living in isolation. And so having these kids come who are in grief and who he loves and he knows them, they're coming from Connecticut, where he's from. And the dad is going into rehab just nearby, just outside of Palm Springs. And it's just a beautiful story about this guy and his own grief and life challenges. There's also a sister involved. So there's a sister and 2 brothers. So you get a lot of family dynamics between them from their childhood. He deals with a lot of heavy issues. So there's a lot of the complications of love and then grief and family dynamics and other heavy things, obviously, but he manages to keep it mainly humorous. And
That's
I
impressive.
think that is such a talent.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wrote a little review on Goodreads and just said that it really shows how dealing with grief and healing from trauma is an ongoing process and part of life versus running away from it or trying to deaden your feelings and just kind of existing versus thriving.
Lovely.
Yeah. So
that's a nice way to say it.
beautiful
Yeah.
story. Yeah. Again, that was The Gunkle by Stephen Rowley. He has a new one out.
The Gunkle Abroad.
Yes.
Yes, and Bianca Murray recommended that on episode 200 when we asked authors to tell us 2 books they couldn't wait for us to read.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you think you'll pick it up?
Oh, I totally will.
Yeah.
I'm not going to rush out and buy it because I do have these summer plans that we just talked about, our intentions that I do want to follow through on. However, especially if I need another heartwarming, humorous break after I finish The Woman's Room, if I do go back there, I think that would probably be the perfect thing to pick up next.
Lovely.
You know, you got to maintain that equilibrium or balance, right?
Heck yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, the other debut that I read was called Arsenic and Adobo by Mia P. Manansala. This is one that I picked up from the library when we were recording with our mystery man and we were talking about cozy mysteries. This one definitely qualifies. This is book 1 in Atita Rosie's Kitchen Mystery. The 5th book comes out this November, so she's already deep into the series. It takes place in Shady Palms, which is a town not too far from Chicago. And one of the things we've talked about, because this is a mystery romance, that the romance genre does well are these content warnings. Sometimes they'll just put like CW at the front when you first open the book. In this one, what she did was an author's note. And she says right at the very beginning that she's a Filipino American who was born and raised in Chicago. And she's written about experiences true to her. But Lila, who is the main protagonist, is a fictional character and very different. But that she still is a Filipino and she wanted to be sensitive to her homeland and to that some experiences that other Filipinos have been very different because of Duerde's drug war. So I thought that it was really good that she talked about that. And then she also said that she specifically set out to make Arsenic and Adobo a lighthearted, humorous novel. And then has in the very back recommendations for further reading you could do if you wanted to understand some of the heavier history of the Philippines and that sort of thing. And I was like, oh, that's really smart. And then the other thing was that there was a glossary with pronunciations of both Tagalog and also then food terms, Filipino food terms, which I definitely referred to a lot as I was reading it. So Lila, the main protagonist, is 25 and she moved to Chicago from Shady Palms to become a cook and a chef. And she was doing well and then ran into some trouble, mainly caused by her then fiance, who was not using the best business practices and got her in a little bit of trouble. So she moved home to help her Tita Rosie in her fledgling restaurant. They're struggling too. There's an opening scene where they're in the restaurant and her ex-boyfriend, who was her high school sweetheart, comes in, and he's become this food critic that's causing a lot of problems for the local restaurateurs. So everyone's on edge when he enters the restaurant. And he looks as if he's having an allergic reaction to something they've fed him. And then he dies.
Wow, that's a theme you have in your books lately.
I know. At first I was like, oh my God, this is just like Pride and Preston Lynn. I'm not going to be able to do this. But it very quickly takes a turn because he actually dies. And then it becomes a mystery. With the other one, it was a slight allergic reaction. This one, he dies. It's exactly like our mystery man says. She becomes the amateur sleuth in the story. There is a dog, her dog.
On the cover of the book, too.
Yes.
Yeah.
What are the other things John said? There is a romantic interest. They don't travel anywhere because this is the first book in the series. I don't know if she has in the other books that have come out. And it was good. I enjoyed it. I loved the food because what ends up happening is, as a food critic, he was causing problems. I'm not going to spoil why and how for the restaurants in the community. So she ends up going to visit these other restaurants and eating all of these different cuisines. I loved that part of the book. She describes it well. There are some recipes in the back. There were some problems with the story itself that didn't keep me from finishing it, but I was like, ooh, I hope as she proceeds in the series, just like you say with Louise Penny, that some of the story gets a little bit stronger. Like there was a scene where a woman's husband is knifed to death in her kitchen and then they're just sitting and having cookies and a cup of tea. And I was like, did she kill him? Like she doesn't seem very upset that he's dead, you know? So just a few things like that. And then there was a scene where she gets in her car and she goes to drive away, but it's icy in winter. And it was like, oh, I had no idea it was even winter, you know? Mm-hmm. So some of the setting, I think, could have used a little bit of work and some of the character development. But I liked the characters a lot. And I liked the food and the conceit of the novel in general. I really enjoyed.
Very cool.
Yeah. So again, it's called Arsenic and Adobo by Mia P. Manansala. And I think I will definitely continue on with the series.
Well, I won't talk about these next two books very long. They're two reference books. I read the MLA Handbook, 9th edition, and the APA Handbook, 7th edition. For those of you who are not familiar with style guides, MLA stands for the Modern Language Association, and APA is the American Psychological Association. MLA is used more for the humanities. APA is used more for sciences, social sciences. At work, I've been updating our library handouts regarding citation styles. Man, you know, I'm very familiar with MLA. APA, not so much. I used it a little bit when I was in library school, and I didn't like it. You know,
Was it just not intuitive?
Well, MLA, you have the author's last name, then the author's first name. Mm-hmm. And in APA, it's the author's last name and then their initial or initials. Mm-hmm. So I don't like that, for one, because I think it's a little disrespectful to the author. And I understand APA, they wanted to do like the bare minimum that you need to be able to track down a source. And I appreciate that. But I also think names are important. Mm-hmm. And then they don't capitalize titles of things. Whereas in MLA, you always capitalize the first letter of each word in a title. Things like that. But I did come to appreciate APA a little bit more, having become so intimate with it. I think it's very flexible, especially with a lot of the more digital resources that are out there. So the main reason I wanted to mention these two books is that if you are currently using either of these styles or even like the Chicago style, that the automatic citation generators that are out there on databases or that you can use for free, most of them are not accurate at all. I was shocked. I was so surprised by that.
That's so interesting because I was going to tell you when I started grad school, in undergrad, I was in business school. I didn't have to write papers and cite shit. Like I got into grad school and I was like, I don't even know what you guys are talking about, MLA, APA. And my son, Jacob, was in school at the same time. And he said, Mom, just use those generators, and then he showed me how to do it. But I thought that was all such a foreign language. And truthfully, I still do. Mm-hmm. I mean, it got to the point in grad school where my professors were like, nice opinion piece. I did not know how to write a research paper.
Yeah, well, and both of these handbooks give help with that. They're not just necessarily about how to cite things. In these newer editions, they also offer suggestions on how to use more inclusive language. So they're wonderful guides, and I would recommend getting the latest paper edition.
Well, it's hard because now you're citing websites and all sorts of things. It's
oh my gosh,
confusing.
Websites, tweets, podcast episodes, podcasts. There are so many different sources out there, even AI. So we decided not to go there at this point because the thing like with ChatGPT, which is an AI generator, you can put in your question or whatever your prompt is, and somebody else can take the very same prompt and do it, but they're going to get different results. So how do you cite that? And one of the answers is you put all that information in an appendix. So your reader could see what prompt you used and then what response you got. And I just wonder about that because when you're citing a source is usually something that has been recorded in some way. Mm-hmm. And if it's something that's a moving target, I don't know. It's kind of hard to wrap your brain around it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, love those books. And they both come in hardcover, paperback, or spiral. And if you're going to gift one of these for the holidays or your first year college student, I would recommend the spiral because they're easier to navigate and then to keep open when you're sitting there working.
Good advice.
My brain is so tired. I am so happy that I'm off in July.
As are the students too, I'm sure. Well, I finished another debut called Love and Hot Chicken, a delicious Southern novel by Mary Liza Hartong. We got a couple copies of this book in Book Cougars HQ as ARCs before the book came out. It's available now, and we ran into it at a bookstore on a Pride display last week, so it came back on my radar. And it was the perfect read for Pride. It was a sweet, quick read, and the protagonist is PJ Spoon, another person who's come back to their hometown. She's working on her PhD at Vanderbilt University when her dad unexpectedly passes away. So she comes back to her small town, and her mother's really grieving. And that's kind of the guise she used, but it turns out she's really grieving too. She was very close to her dad. And so she decides to take a job at the local hot chicken shack called the Chickie Shack. She's working there all day, working the fryer, which is what the chicken is cooked in. So it's a big job working back in the kitchen. And the guy who owns the Chickie Shack, which is a chain, decides he's going to throw a beauty pageant. And people have to go. There's no choice. You don't have a choice. You have to participate. It just leads to a lot of small town hijinks. Her best friend is a gay guy. They grew up together. He and her mother are very close. And so they create all of these wonderful costumes for her out of denim and sequins. And she ends up falling for a woman who's working there at the Chickie Shack with her. And they perform together because they both have been in Nashville and have some backstory around music. So my chief complaint I wrote with all capitals, more food, exclamation point. I thought there would be more food. The Chickie Shack is really just a backdrop for the story. There is one scene where she's out with her best friend and they go to get some food and there's a choice between fries and hush puppies. And he's like, there's never a choice. You always go with hush puppies.
Amen.
Amen. I love me a hush puppy, especially from the South. So I wanted to read, the one thing was that her mother, who's very much a feminist, started a club called the Penny Whistle Hog Club. And she founded it in 1985, and it meets wherever God can spare a chair. The church basement if it's raining, Mama's backyard if it's sunny, and if they're really in a pinch, the old tennis court that's half sucked into a sinkhole. No matter where they roam, they always find something to care deeply about. Dental hygiene, suicide prevention. And then PJ says, I was about 7 or 8 when I asked Daddy how they decided on a cause. Well, he said, I reckon they read the penny whistle psst, which is the local paper, and start from there. Either that or they flip a coin. And so one of the things, the story arcs in here is that brigade is trying to get women's feminine hygiene products to not be taxed, which is a really cool thread as well. The one thing about this book, if you do not like a pun or a metaphor, you will not last very long. Okay. I mean, it's like every third paragraph. I mean, really, it's really very Southern and very funny in that way. I enjoyed it. It was the perfect read. Like you with the Gunkle, it wasn't because of reading something heavy. It was doing all of that grant work. I just needed to read things that were not work at all and just a fun story. Again, it's called Love and Hot Chicken, a delicious Southern novel by Mary Liza Hartong. And it's what also got me to pick back up Hot Chicken, because I wanted to learn more about the chicken that wasn't talked about very much in the novel.
Well, now we really need to go out for some hot chicken.
Yes.
I think last time we went, did I get the mac and cheese and
you
hot
did.
chicken? Oh, that was
and
good.
I got the sandwich. Yeah. I know. I really want to go, actually. Yeah, okay. Anytime. My stomach is grumbling.
I know, mine too. I wonder if they deliver.
Hold on, y'all. We're going to put you on hold.
I read a picture book. Somebody recommended it on Twitter. I know we're supposed to call it X now, but just like the Sears Tower will always be the Sears Tower to me, I think Twitter will always be Twitter. I don't know.
I don't think you're in the minority there.
Yeah. This book is called Dive, The Story of Breathing Underwater by Chris Gall. Gall. Has a delightful cover of, I think it's a woman in a scuba diving mask with one of those little puffer fish kind of in front of her, looking all cute. So this book is about breathing underwater, and it shows the history of it and the science behind what is needed. He starts with the ancient Greeks, who used to have divers who would go underwater to collect sponges and other things on the ocean floor, and they'd have these big stone tablets they'd attach to ropes to help them sink down quickly, and then when they were ready to come up, they'd tug. And these are people who held their breath for like up to 5 minutes. And then he goes on showing the science of why you get more pressure in your ears and how you can, like most of those ancient Greeks, he says, were deaf who did that. They became deaf because their ears ruptured because of the pressure. And then throughout history and in other places of the world, he shows different techniques that were used to even do things like build bridge foundations, and how that contributed the findings of what was going on with the workers who were going down below, so deep below the waterline, they would get the bends basically. So that's something that they learned. Of course, a lot of people died and suffered in the name of building and diving for wrecks or work, livelihood. The only thing I didn't particularly appreciate about this book is that most of the people looked very sad to me, when I don't think that they were supposed to look sad. I thought that was kind of interesting. See, here's another. I'm showing Emily some pictures.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was very interesting about the science and different ways people invented suits to go down onto the ocean floor. It's for ages 5 to 8, and I would think a kid of that age might need an adult to help them a little bit. There is a glossary at the end. Then again, you know, kids 5 to 8 now are a lot smarter than I was at 5 to 8. So I don't really know. I don't have a 5 to 8-year-old in my life right now.
There's a lot of words on the page, but
there are. And, you know, he talks about things like nitrogen and oxygen and carbon dioxide and pressure. But then he has this page of fun facts at the end, which one of the things that I was surprised by was that coconuts are more dangerous than sharks. Approximately 150 people on average die each year from coconuts killing them from falling coconuts versus about 10 people who die from a shark attack. Yeah.
Glad I don't have a coconut tree in my backyard.
I know, right? I was thinking about what do people in the tropics do? Like, do they tell tourists? Probably don't sit and lean up against a tree when you're reading your book.
They hand out hard hats.
I know.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. That would hurt. They're hard. Wow, that's so interesting.
Isn't that? Yeah. And then this is the thing, too. Let me just read this. On land, our ears can tell the direction of a sound because the sound is detected by one ear before the other. But sound moves 5 times faster under water than in air. The speed of the passing sound makes it impossible for our ears to detect the difference in time. And therefore, sounds underwater seem to come from any direction. And I thought, horror novels underwater, right? You don't know where that call is coming from. And then he also has some sources. Overall, like I said, I really enjoyed it. And it's new. It just came out in April from Macmillan. Again, that was Dive by Chris Gall. So I read a short story, and I know you've read a short story. Do you want to go first?
Sure. I read 2 because 2 weeks have passed. One of them was in this collection called Craft, Stories I Wrote for the Devil by Ananda Lima. And the idea of craft here is, craft, like writers talk about craft, is the world of writing.
Like books like The Craft of Writing, or I know some artists back in the day would be like, writing is an art. It's not a craft, but it is. It's doing the work, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I think people take workshops on craft. That's where I see it used a lot. Like it's when you're trying to improve your writing technique, you talk about craft. The conceit of this short story collection is that at a Halloween party in 1999, a writer slept with the devil. And then she sees him again and again. He pops back up in the collection. And the way she does it is there are these, they're not called parentheses. They're like the fancy curly Q parentheses. When she does that, that's her conversation of going back to her experience with the devil, or she's communicating with the devil. So the short story I read was called Idle Hands, and I chose this for 2 reasons. I loved the title, and the second was it looked epistolary, and I love things told via letter, or even now it translates more to like via text message or via emails, and I think these ended up being emails, which I didn't know when I first looked at it. And it's about her workshopping a short story. And it's hilarious because each person that communicates with her that's in this workshop says absolute opposites. They all contradict each other about what she should be doing, what they liked about it. And then they started saying egomaniacal things about that she's not a good writer and stuff like that. And I just thought it was brilliantly written. I really recommend it. And then when you get to the end, you get those fancy curly Q parentheses. She's playing a chess game with her partner, and it's during the pandemic, and they're each taking turns, but her partner is working in the medical field. So it really takes a dark turn. Like it starts out really funny, and then it takes a dark turn. I thought it was a really well crafted short story. I highly recommend this collection. It's out now. It just came out in June. So that was my first one. And then the second one was in that collection that I can't remember if I talked about in the podcast. I know I talked about it on a YouTube. I did talk about it on the podcast, right?
I think so. It's so gorgeous.
Yeah, it's called Someplace Generous, an inclusive romance anthology edited by Elena Ellis and Amber Flame. And this is a new imprint, and it's about having inclusivity in the authors and what they're writing about, I think is the best way to say it. And I read the piece by Jessica P. Pride, who was a guest on the podcast for the anthology Black Love Matters. And her piece is called Why Won't You Die? And it's about Dream, who's an assassin. And she's assigned this person she's supposed to kill, Minerva, who's a reporter. and she keeps attempting to kill her and she's not dying. It was really interesting, and it has, I'm just going to read in the back how it describes it. The way this book is set up, I really enjoyed it. I should say I listened to it on audio and read it as well. And there's content descriptions in the very back, but they brought that to the front of the audiobook, which I thought was really smart because it's a key about how sexual the short stories are. So the key is candlelight glow, where there's no sex seen in the story, which doesn't mean it's not sexy. And then bonfire heat contains NSFW content, but depictions are not graphic, up close, or detailed. Call the fire truck may include open door sex scenes, kink, or detailed physical interactions. And then shadow work. These stories artfully address trauma or violence in a character's backstory. So it's a really good way, again, about giving content warning to the stories. And then for each of them in the back, they also have just a very quick synopsis. So Jessica's is, Dee is a skilled assassin on a job, but the woman she's been sent to kill just won't die. When she finds herself cornered by her own mark, an irritatingly adorable, seemingly indestructible journalist named Minerva, Dee can't help but ask the question, why won't you die? Could be compared to DC Comics and Marvel Cinematic Universes. What if Lois Lane was Luke Cage? Subgenres, contemporary, speculative, superhero. And it's the heat level is candlelight glow. So that's the one where there was no sex scene in the story, but it doesn't mean it's not sexy. And it was really fun. I enjoyed it. It didn't translate to audio very well, so I listened to it and then I was like, nah, I want to go back and read it and make sure I really got this.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Was it just the narrator, or do you think it was the writing itself was better read?
I think it has to do with, it's one of those stories, and oh my goodness, the author Shuli Kaywood would want me to know what this is called because I've learned about it in one of her workshops that I took. But it's one of those where things are numbered. You know, there's like 4 different sections of the story. So I think I couldn't quite tell with the audio that it was switching perspectives. So I was like, who's talking now? I'm confused. Mm-hmm. And when I actually looked at it, it all made sense. Okay. You know? Yeah. So I think it was the structure of the story didn't translate well. It wasn't that the narrator didn't do a good job or anything like that.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Just curious.
What did you read?
The short story I read was one of Willa Cather's, Her Boss, which was the story for June. And this was one that was published in Smart Set, the British version of that magazine, in 1919. And I was surprised at how uneven this story was. It's about a man. He's successful, wealthy. He's been diagnosed with a terminal kidney situation. He comes home from work, and his wife, his children, then later his colleagues, like none of them are taking it seriously. They're all just kind of like, oh, you'll be fine. Oh, these specialists overreact. The only person who takes him and feels serious towards him and a loss is a woman who's taking dictation. And she's not even like high on the totem pole at work. You know, she's the new one. But as he's dictating a letter to one of his old friends telling him the situation, he happens to look at her and tears are running down her face. So it's this kind of story about how he loves his family and his friends, but there's this disconnect in temperament and a lack of emotional connection. And one of the scholars, I read a little bit about it. There's not a lot written about this story, and 2 of other Cather stories that are called office wives stories, set in offices at that time period. You know, that this story, the theme of an older man finding emotional connection with a younger person became a theme for Cather. So her novel, The Professor's House, is very similar. And then Lucy Gayheart, there's another similar situation like that. Even in Saphira and the Slave Girl, that's one we both read with Jenny a couple years ago. So it's interesting for that. But overall, I just thought the ending was so abrupt and a non-ending. It was almost like, this sounds so rude, but I just thought it's almost like Cather fell asleep while writing it and dreamt that she finished it. and in the morning woke up and submitted it.
Interesting.
It was so surprisingly not as good as even some of her earlier short stories. So I don't know if she was just done with it, because she was going to write a series of, well, I think there was a fourth one written that's been lost, but some publisher was going to put out a book of collected short stories called Office Wives. One of the theories is she just lost interest because My Antonia was a hit and she was moving on to...
Yeah, maybe she was writing them to make money. We've talked about that, right?
Yeah.
And she was like, I don't want to write any more of these. Here.
Yeah, exactly. Because she was starting to find financial stability. And also just, as an artist too, what really turned her on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that was Her Boss by Willa Cather.
Well, we both also read The Reader's Advisory Guide to Romance by Robin Bradford.
Yeah, this is basically a reference book. It's put up by the American Library Association. It's part of their Reader's Advisory series.
And I've never read anything like this. It's really pointed towards librarians and about if you want to build a collection of romance books in your library and or just be able to service your patrons who are looking for these books as they come into the library. And so they talk about the different kinds of tropes and just the romance industry overarchingly. Like she refers to Romance-landia as a term that was coined to identify people who read and write romance, as well as those who write about romance, which I thought was really interesting. So there's even a reference to people who blog about romance and things like that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I appreciated so many things within it, even talking about how a lot of libraries still, a book will have to be reviewed in 2 different journals before it can be purchased. Like that's part of their collection development guidelines. And her recommendation is to not worry about books not having reviews, that even a lot of books that are not reviewed or a lot of books that are self-published are worthy of being purchased for the library. But again, so much of it depends on one's library collection policies, which a lot of libraries have them for a reason. As she jokingly says, one of the theories about those types of restrictions is so romance doesn't take over the entire library because there are so many published each year.
She mentions that there are 10,000 romance novels published each year.
Yeah.
That's a lot. Mm-hmm. And, the libraries can't have them all. So
right? Yeah.
I get that. But she did a really good job of talking about some of the things we've been talking about and trying to learn this year about different tropes, things that I still am struggling with. I think I'm going to take this and write down some notes, like forced proximity is one of them. And I was like, oh, that's what Yulin Kwang's novel was. They were forced into a writing room together and they couldn't not be together, even though they didn't want to. And Friends to Lovers, of course, is one we've talked about. Marriage of Convenience, Second Chance. I really enjoyed that part of it.
Yeah, that's a great series. And they are reference books, which means they're expensive. I've had the one on horror that I think was written by Becky Sprafford, I think her name is, who was actually a librarian in Berwyn, Illinois, near where I had lived for a while. So if you can get one from your local library on whatever genre you're interested in, they're really helpful.
Yeah, and they're really small and to the point, which I really appreciated. Yeah. So should we talk about Biblio Adventures? We went on a big, fun joint jaunt together.
Yes, we did. We hit the road. We stayed in Connecticut, but had 3 fabulous stops, at least 3. Our first stop was at the Lyme Arts Association. We were stopping in to see pieces by friends of ours who are being exhibited, but we spent a lot of time downstairs in an exhibit in the children's area where there was an exhibit inspired by Emily Dickinson's poem, Hope is a Thing with Feathers.
And it was really sweet to see how the kids interpreted that, because they really took the first line and interpreted it. They did have the whole poem posted there. And I love kids' art so much. And I think it was, I can't remember the ages. Do you remember now?
Oh, I don't know. I think the oldest was 13, and I remember some being 8.
Yeah.
And I was like impressed by those 8-year-olds. Some of them, I was just like, wow, their technique with light or whatever, and they're so young.
It was really sweet. I'm really glad we saw that.
Yeah, a lot of bright colors, some not bright either, like some more political by younger people and others more comforting.
Right. There was one I walked by and I was like, oh, preteen. Lots of angst coming out of that picture.
Oh, I remember
you.
that one. Yeah, that emotion in that piece was intense.
Yeah. And then we were hungry, so we hopped in the car and we drove over to Noank, and we stopped and ate at Herring's, which is a seaside lobster shack, and got our first lobster of the season.
Yeah, it was pretty delicious.
It was.
Yeah. And leaving that place, we stumbled upon 2 little free libraries right at Noack Park. There was one for adults, and then there was a kids' little free library. The kids' little free library was a little picked over and thin, and that could be because kids are out. It's summertime, possibly. But the adults' little free library had some good stuff in there.
We controlled ourselves. I know there was one I wanted, and I was like, don't do it.
Yeah. Well, there was a Moby Dick.
Yes, that's right. And then we hopped back in the car and drove just a short distance to go to Bank Square Books, which is in Mystic, Connecticut, right downtown. And they just recently announced that they are going to be relocating to a different storefront a little bit farther down the road. I think maybe officially in Stonington. I'm not sure.
Yeah. The current location has been there, say, since the 80s. Not 100%. It's across the street from Mystic Pizza. For those of you who've seen the Julia Roberts film, I think it was her first movie. But yeah, so we wanted to have one last browse together. They're moving in September, but we know we're both going to be doing some traveling this summer, and we knew this summer would completely get away from us, and we wanted to be there one more time together.
Really, it's just a beautiful store. We had a lovely visit there.
Lovely browse. I bought one book. I bought a Ursula K. Le Guin novel. I don't remember the title right now. It was a thin one. And I know it's one that's recommended as a good place to start with her, because I've only read one other of hers.
I think I've read a short story. Yeah, I've never read a full novel of hers. No. We also were doing a little reconnaissance. They have a very good romance shelf at the bookstore, and we were doing a little reconnaissance to choose the third quarter read-along.
Oh my gosh, that we have to announce this episode.
We will announce at the end of the episode. But, we just mentioned how that nice little book talked about there were 10,000 romance books published each year, and it made us feel better about why we've been having such a hard time choosing the books.
Indeed. And it's a genre we're not that familiar with, so those are 2 major factors. Hurdles is the good word.
So we were looking at the romance books there as well. But then I also went the next day to R.J. Julia Booksellers in Madison, Connecticut, to see Ann Leary talk about her book, I've Tried Being Nice, which is a book of essays. She was really fun. She was there by herself. She said it was her first event where she wasn't in conversation with someone. She has a lot of social anxiety. She said she used to drink to handle her social anxiety. She's a recovered alcoholic, so that's not an option anymore. So she just faces her fears. And she decided to read, which she was nervous. She'd never done that before. And she read the essay called Batman, which is the one I read a little piece out of in the last episode. That's about her hearing the morning news where they do a little teaser of, up next, what you don't want to hear your kids say. And she said, I was curious because I'd already heard my kids say what you never want to hear, which was, Mom, there's a bat on your pajamas. She goes on to talk about her house in the country being overtaken by bats. It was really sweet. She read the whole essay, which was a lot, but I actually really did enjoy it. I don't usually enjoy hearing people read too much. And then she took questions, and she is married to the actor and comedian Dennis Leary. So one of the questions I had for her was, what is it like for your partner and your kids when you write about them? And are there any rules of engagement about what you're allowed to write about and that sort of thing? And she talked about that she's been married to Dennis Leary since 1982. and they went through a really tough patch. And she wrote a modern love piece about how tennis saved their marriage. And that when her kids saw that piece, they were like, what are you talking about? You and Dad had problems, because they were heading for divorce. They had actually decided they were getting divorced. So she said, once that happened, I ended up writing a memoir, and now I've written these essays. They're kind of used to the fact that she tells things about their lives that they might not have even been aware of were happening. So I thought that was really interesting. She talked about growing up very lonely because her family moved a lot, and that libraries saved her. And that one of the things that she loved is no matter how difficult school was, and if she was being bullied, the Dewey Decimal System was the same everywhere she went.
Lovely. Yeah.
And I thought that was really sweet. And then an aside, she mentioned that her modern love piece was one of the ones chosen to be part of that television series they're doing on Amazon. And it was starring Tina Fey and John Slattery, which she thought was quite a compliment. But she said they really take those stories and run with them, and it doesn't really resemble the original story.
For sure.
Yeah, to hear her talk about that experience. And she also talked about that part of what this essay collection encompasses is when she went through menopause and she realized that one day she woke up, she thought it was going to be a much more gentle transition, but one day she woke up and she just didn't give a flying F anymore about being nice, which is why that collection is called I've Tried Being Nice. So I thought that was interesting. It was a really great event. I enjoyed it.
Nice. Very good. Well, I had a couch biblio adventure. I attended a meeting of the North Central Connecticut International Thomas Merton Society chapter. They had a panel discussion of Merton's book, New Seeds of Contemplation. I had purchased a copy of his book, Seeds of Contemplation, which was published in 1949 when I was up in Vermont for Booktopia last year, when I went up by myself and I was working on my final school paper and everything, but I took a drive to this bookstore that was a used bookstore, absolutely fantastic. I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of it, but I'm sure I could dig it up if we need to. It's in the show notes somewhere. The Seeds of Contemplation, like I said, it came out in 1949, before Merton was ordained. And in 1962 is when he published New Seeds of Contemplation. This was at a time when he was exploring a more engaged style of spirituality, as opposed to the personal spirituality and living a more sheltered life and having a more personal spirituality. He was really starting to open up to the world and different traditions like Buddhism. I thought I had read Seeds of Contemplation. I don't think I did. I might have had one of those little tiny booklets with highlights of it or something once upon a time. Shambhala Press used to put them out. And they'd be in spinner racks, like on a bookstore's, next to the register or something. So I did buy a copy of New Seeds, and I hope to read that. They recommended reading like a chapter a week and really thinking about it and contemplating it. But that it is a kind of book that it's really good to have a group to try and read it with. But I'm not making any kind of commitments to it. It was just really an interesting event, and I attended mainly to see what they had to say about it. So even though he was getting into various traditions, though, his writings are always, I guess, deeply grounded in Catholicism. And my interest in him is from his memoir, The Seven-Story Mountain, which is one of my favorite spiritual memoirs.
Which you talked about when we did our first bookshelf roulette. It was the book you landed on.
Right? Yeah, because Robin G. had sent me a new copy of it. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I had an unexpected biblio adventure. The day before yesterday, I was driving my normal route between home and Book Cougars headquarters, and we'd had like a little stormy night and some utility lines were down. So I was sent on this huge detour that went on and on and on into neighborhoods I didn't even know existed. And lo and behold, was the most beautiful little free library built into a tree stump.
Yeah, gorgeous.
So sweet. Oh my gracious. It made the twisty, turny, snaky drive worth it. And I was late for a lunch date with the gentleman caller, but I made it.
You made it. I love that too, the selfie that you posted. has a wood pile in the back.
Yeah.
I just appreciate people who do that with a stump.
Yeah, it was really sweet. It didn't hold very many books. Like I couldn't donate one because it was completely packed, but I just thought, what a beautiful addition to the neighborhood.
Yeah, very cool. You'll have to take me sometime.
I will. Like I said, it was a neighborhood I didn't even know existed. So there you go.
So what about upcoming jaunts?
I have one on the books that I'm excited about. It's July 17th at R.J. Julia's in Madison, Connecticut, and it's author Amy Bloom in conversation with J. Courtney Sullivan.
Oh, wow.
Who's an author I really love, about her new novel, The Cliffs, which is coming out the day this episode drops on July 2nd. I have had that arc in my hands, and I am looking forward to reading it. What about you?
Well, I'll be going to the 83rd annual gathering of the Thoreau Society in Concord, Massachusetts. The dates are July 10th to the 14th. I'm only going for one day, though, because I can't swing all of the days based on prior commitments that I have. But the day that I can go, which is that Thursday, they're going to have a Margaret Fuller session.
Perfect.
Yes. So that is why I'm going to start reading Women in the 19th Century very soon. So I will hopefully have it under my belt for those papers. And then also, this is kind of a little bit of a follow-up to the last episode when we were talking about eco-fiction and eco-criticism. There's also going to be a session sponsored by ASLE, which is the Association for the Study of Literature and Environment. We talked last time of ISLE, I-S-L-E, which is their journal. So I just thought I'd clarify these things. ISLE stands for Interdisciplinary Studies in Literature and Environment. I was so surprised that I couldn't pull that out of my head. I'm thinking like, well, Chris, that was 25 years ago, so give yourself a break.
Yeah, for sure.
So and I'll be able to attend to other sessions as well, but those two, I'm super excited that the day that I can go happens to be when those are two subjects I'm very interested in.
I wonder if Alison Pataki will be there.
Oh, I wonder. Yeah. I wonder. Megan Marshall's going to be there.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Right on.
Yeah. What about upcoming reads?
Well, we have a buddy read for Big Book Summer. We are reading Fellowship Point by Alice Elliott Dark. We are going to put a buddy read thread on our Goodreads group page. We have done that for the past, I think, 2 or 3 years for our big book reads, and we haven't done it this year. So we thought since we're doing a buddy read, we would throw that up there. We're hoping to read it by July 20th. But that thread will be there starting the day this episode drops. And if you've read the novel and you want to talk about it, if you want to read it and read along with us, we'd love to have you. The only thing we ask is if you're writing anything that's a spoiler, if you can just put that first, like spoiler alert.
Yeah, just in case. Right? Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this one.
Me too.
Yeah, I'm so happy we're doing it.
This was on my list last year of potential reads. So a year later, I'm getting to it.
Well, that's okay. In my copy of Gunkle, I've been trying to either write where I've purchased a book, like with a sticky note at least, or I keep the receipt in it. And I purchased it on June 6th, 2023. So that wasn't bad.
Yeah,
just, a year. So, yeah. And I bought it at Breakwater Books.
Right downtown Guilford.
Our local indie. Well, the book that I have coming up is The Genius of Judy. How Judy Blume Rewrote Childhood for All of Us. This is a new biography by Rochelle Bergstein. This book is coming out July 16th. And I just want to read this one paragraph. So, who doesn't love Judy Blume?
Especially if you're our age.
Right, exactly. So, this is kind of early on in her preface. She writes about how when she first discovered Judy Blume, her dad had always read to her at night. And when she started reading Judy Blume, she goes to him and she's like, sorry, Dad, I don't want you to read to me tonight. Because, you don't want your dad reading Judy Blume to you. You know what I mean? So this is just a paragraph I'll read that's a little bit further on in the preface. I wanted to write this book to figure out why Judy Blume is still so beloved when many of her contemporary young adult novelists, like Betty Miles and Norma Klein, have receded into history. I wanted to investigate why just the mention of Bloom's name is enough to break the ice with the stranger and get a serious, otherwise put-together adult woman giggling. Try it. Say the name Judy Blume to the nearest Gen X or millennial book lover and see what happens. Is it a smile? A fast flush of joy? I've seen this look so many times since I started researching Bloom's life and work. A glimmer that floats across the eyes, almost like the person across from me is recalling a former flame. I just love that because it's so true.
It's so true. When Chris pulled this book out of her bag, I clapped with glee, like, I was 13 again.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And so this book, as I mentioned, it's coming out July 16th. I actually won this on a Goodreads giveaway.
Very cool.
So if you're new to Goodreads, when you put a book on your to-be-read list, if you have the notification set up, you can get notified when a forthcoming book has a giveaway or when a book by a favorite author is released or anything like that. So every now and then I'll do that and I'll say, well, whatever. It's been a long time since I've won a copy and I'm so pleased to have this in my hands right now. So thank you to Goodreads and the publisher is Atria.
Nice. Lovely. Well, the only other book I have coming up is The Lost Boy of Santa Chionia by Juliet Grames. Our mystery man talked about this as one of his recommendations on the last episode, and Juliet's going to be an upcoming guest, so I'm going to dig in.
Well, the only thing left now, Emily, is for us to announce what our third quarter read-along pick is.
Oh my gosh, of course. Are any of you wondering? We had a really hard time, y'all. And to remind you, part of it is we want to make sure that it's readily available, that there's an audiobook edition of it, because we know a lot of you are audiobook listeners. And it was just hard because we're trying to decide what kind of romance novels we want to read, what genre.
Yeah, this is our year of exploring what romance is, since we're both new to the genre, and we know a lot of you are as well. Like, we want to try and be kind of well-rounded in our romance reading. We have found that, I guess, the last two authors have been trailblazers. So we also wanted to go with the trailblazer in one of the subgenres in the romance category, and that is mystery, suspense, thriller.
Right. We toyed with doing a cozy mystery series and getting everyone started on a series. And we looked at a lot of those, but we decided to just stick with a standalone and with someone who really is known as a trailblazer that really set off in that vein. She had been doing more classic romance writing under pen names. She came out and started writing different kind of books with her actual name.
And that name is Sandra Brown.
If you go to your local library, you'll probably, like Nora Roberts, see that there are shelves of Sandra Brown novels. So then, even once we decided that, it was hard to decide which book to go with. I listened to an interview with her where she was asked, because she has had 73 New York Times bestsellers, and she was asked, what do you think is the book that after you're gone, people are going to say is the book that they remember you by? And this is the book she said.
And that book is Envy.
Dun, 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 dun.
So Envy by Sandra Brown, it was published in 1991. So I know one of the concerns Emily brought up was that it might be a little bit heteronormative. That's a speculation. We're not sure. We'll be finding out pretty soon here.
Yeah, we have not read it. As is always the case, we do not read our read-along books. We are discovering along with you. We're very much looking forward to having a Zoom conversation about it and to chatting with everybody about it on Goodreads. We have not chosen the Zoom date. We will let you know that on the next episode. But when this episode drops, we will open the Goodreads thread for conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you so much to everyone who is sticking around and reading romance with us. The one follow-up I do want to say that was mentioned in the reference guide, the Reader's Advisory Guide to Romance. This came up, I think, when we posted that puzzle, the romance puzzle that Aunt Ellen did, and it had all these romance covers, and people on social media were saying, wait a minute, I didn't know that book was a romance.
Right.
That there is a difference between a love story and a romance, and sometimes there's a little blurring between the lines there,
Right.
I think.
Yeah, when it's a capital R romance novel, it's supposed to have a main love interest, an HEA, right? A happily ever after or a happy enough for now kind of ending.
Right, an HFN, happy for now,
Yeah.
they're also calling it. Love stories can be really sad.
And tragic.
Yeah.
Yeah, because one of the books, I'm looking at that right now, like they have the Thornbirds, that puzzle. So there's love. That's definitely a love story, but a romance.
Not a true romance.
Yeah.
But yet the box says romance
I
on
know,
it. So it's a
yeah.
little misleading. But I think we're all learning that. And I think I love a love story, you know. So I think that I also thought I was reading romance. But now I know that there are different rules to the game.
And that you can pick up a capital R romance novel and know, especially if it's published within a certain date range, you know, that you're going to have a happy ending.
Right.
You know, there might be a lot of trials and tribulations. And I just love learning about all the different subgenres, you know, and that you can kind of know what you're going to be getting into, like a favorite TV show or something like that, or like a sitcom.
Right.
You know that there could be some uncomfortable situations and real life things, but the main focus is going to be on the funny bits.
Right. And this book, Envy by Sandra Brown, one of the things she's known for is that she really started writing steamier books. So there might be a little steam going on in this one. Also strong protagonists and really writing what she wanted to write. Before that, when she was writing more classically and under pen names, what they wanted from her was somewhat prescribed. And this was really one of the novels where she took off in a direction that she really wanted to go.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to it because it's set partly in New York and partly off the coast of Georgia. And it's about an editor and a writer, and it's a story within a story within a story. So I think even though it's an older book, I think it sounds really fascinating.
Yeah, and we were laughing that this probably could have been a good choice for our year of reading books about books, too.
Right.
So there's that little interesting meta thread. So Envy by Sandra Brown, third quarter read along. We're looking forward to reading it with you. We are likely going to have the Zoom conversation in September.
Right.
But again, we will let you know those dates on the next episode. All right, everybody.
Happy reading. Thanks for listening to The Book Cougars with Chris Wallach and Emily Fine. We'll be back again with another episode in 2 weeks. Until then, come chat with us on social media, Goodreads, or email us at bookcougars@gmail.com. If you'd like to help support our podcast, please tell others about us, leave a review wherever you listen, and consider becoming a patron. Even $1 a month is a big help. Learn more about that on our website, bookcougars.com, where you'll find the show notes for this and all of our past episodes.
Thanks, everybody.
This episode was edited by Pat Keogh Sound Design.